You're very welcome. Thank you all very much. The idea that my robot lawnmower may be hacked, Paul, is fairly low down the list of the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau, I would imagine. But what is the landscape right now for you guys? Because the idea is that there's a lot of other crime out there, but you guys are emerging as a unit that's going to be very busy over the next couple of years.
I suppose, like every organisation, we have our demands on our service with finite resources, and those resources are spread thinly in some cases. In other cases, they're not. Cyber threats, cyber crime is a growing trend. It's a growing proliferation all over. The issue that we find a lot of the time is that there's an element of under-reporting to ourselves. I go back to our presentation that took place earlier on, where we had a threat analysis of a live scenario, and a couple of steps were referenced. You know, you deal with your regulatory obligations, you notify your customers, you notify the Data Protection Commissioner. And this is no criticism of the two presenters, but there was no mention of notifying the Garda Síochána. Even when there was a reference to the fact that one of the potential offences was a business email compromise, which is money involved. And we have a significant resource where we have contacts with banks, with financial institutions, where we can reach out and get that funding frozen.
You can set in train a series of events that might actually stop the bloom.
Yeah, it does. We're conscious of the fact that all of this corporate protection, this security steps, these protocols that are in place have to take place.
But no more than I was laughing at Dee saying the DPC is like the Spanish Inquisition. Are they afraid of bringing the guards down on top of them, and is that why they're?
I don't know if there's a corporate fear there as far as is concerned. I would suggest that there's some element of reputational damage potential there, and the focus, initial, immediate focus, is to protect the data, to protect the customers, and to secure the systems that are in place and follow the protocols that take place. But at some stage, we are dependent on being told that these incidents are taking place, the nature of the incidents that are taking place, so that we can respond to them, so that we can deal with other agencies, such as the speaker that's coming on shortly.
I was just going to say, such as REN. And I would imagine that if somebody outside here decides to punch me on the nose, randomly, I fall over and hurt myself, the guards will be brought here from the Bridewell around the corner. They will conduct an investigation. They'll take the CCTV. They'll identify that it was Ronan Murphy who, for some reason, decided to punch me in the nose, and arrest him and bring him through the process. The cybercrime could be committed outside of the jurisdiction on the other side of the world, where you have no chance of catching the cyber equivalent of Ronan Murphy. So how can you deal with that, and how can you assure people that it's still the right thing to come to the guards?
I wouldn't go down the lines of suggesting that we've no chance. There's always a chance of catching somebody. There's certainly no chance if we don't know about it in the first place. We will be dependent very much with the corporation involved, the individual involved, to work with them, their system admin, their internal protocols, their external agencies that look after their systems, their cyber security, to get to the end result of identifying an individual. Just because they're not located in Ireland doesn't mean they can't be prosecuted.
So you can work with international agencies?
Well, cybercrime is international at the end of the day, so the approach has to be international.
We are using Slido again, ladies and gentlemen, so please feel free to put questions up there using the hashtag FutureSec19, and it's sli.do will bring it to you. Mark Jordan, it was referenced earlier on, it's very hard to get people who are, I suppose, equipped with the right language and the right skill set. There are good courses out there. What more can be done so that you have the right people who are able to press the right buttons, be it contact the guards, contact the DPC, contact the customers in the right way? How do we find those people?
And I think we're all acutely aware of the fact that there's a skills shortage or a skills challenge. And you know, one thing that Skillnet Ireland are trying to do through the 68 different networks we have nationally here is work with companies to really understand what they see as their pain points and what they grapple with in terms of protecting their networks. And we take the view that companies need to be more progressive and aggressive when it comes to digital transformation, but what underpins digital transformation really is protecting the digital interests that organization has. So we run a various different training programs. We collaborate with what we call the triple helix, which is with industry, with the major universities in this country, and with government to curate a lot of the high-profile programs that have been well documented, the masters that we have in cybersecurity or blockchain or AI. They're real top-end programs, and even beyond that, last week we launched with Science Foundation Ireland a PhD program in data science. A big component of that is cybersecurity. However, when you look further down into the world of SMEs, there's limited training that we've embraced so far. So one of the big objectives that we have at Skillnet Ireland is through a cyber security initiative, is to find those companies, find those SMEs, engage with them, and really let them know that cybersecurity is ubiquitous across all of their businesses, and work with them in terms of curating the type of training programs that they're going to engage with.
And when you think about it, no matter what the organization, if you have an office, once every couple of weeks, you're going to do a fire drill. The alarm is going to go off, and everyone's going to file out of the building, stand around outside, kick the shoes, and go back in and go, that's right, we're prepared for a fire. Why don't we do that with cybersecurity? And why are we reluctant to make it core to what happens at every level in the business, from the basic data entry level people to the CEO? Sorry, that's you, Enda.
I suppose just like the Garda and the FBI, who we regard as armed and handsome, we have our own procedures and processes that we work through. And it's about constant reinforcement. So we would do 3 major cyber incident events every year. And that started at the leadership level and board level, where the ask was, make sure it doesn't happen, not possible, to how do we actually act when it does likely happen. And we brought in third-party companies who actually put leadership team under pressure. We brought in journalists to do mock interviews. And we went through the whole process of who gets involved in assessing incidents and what happens. So at that level, we've now created a muscle memory in the organization that's used to it. They mightn't like when it happens, but they're used to it. And at a staff level, it's amazing that staff members are very protective of their Gmail and Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, and would have an emotional attachment to protecting that. But yet coming into the office environment, it's sort of not their problem. So we look at 2 ways of trying to harness a bit of emotion around that. And that one is we actually get teams together and we mock up how do we really make a whole mess of this. How we mess with the underwriting team and really make life difficult for them in terms of
do you cascade it? It starts with a small thing.
It starts top. But what we want to do is we want to get people to actually getting, because if you're just doing training, and we do the formal training, but if you do the formal training all the time, they get fatigued by it. But if you flip it and say, have a bit of fun with it and say, actually, if we're going to take colleagues, how we'd really mess with their day, how we stop them doing their work, how we get an attack in or a malicious email in on top of them. And then we say, well, because it's like uncontrolled risks, then what controls you put back in. So they come back on that. We'll do mock phishing campaigns 2 to 3 times a year per team. And that's always interesting because it's always the busiest and brightest people clicking the links.
And forgive me now for work, do they know that the exercise is underway, or do you try to catch
No,
people?
they don't know it's underway. So they'll know afterwards. So we do blocks of 150 staff at a time. And we look at and we give feedback to the teams. And we also do unannounced walkarounds in terms of equipment left out. It's a complete no-no to have passwords or any user credentials written anywhere. There are black marks for people on teams.
Because I can't remember which of I think they've all been caught at this stage, the credit rating companies in the US, one of them had a ridiculous password, such as password. Do you get to weed that out of the system and reinforce the importance of having the right password, as we saw earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes down, it's basic hygiene. So no matter how sophisticated the tech coming at us is, or the tech we're using to defend, it is always down to hygiene and personal ownership and behavior and people just having a bit more of an emotional attachment to doing the right thing.
Mike, I suppose familiarity breeds contempt, doesn't it? That if we're overly familiar with having this in our pocket, and let's face it, there's a lot of work on this for me right now.
Sure.
I'm sure if we took your phone out, there's a lot of work for you as well. And that proliferation of connected devices, we were talking about the attack surface earlier on, it's huge and it's only going to get bigger.
It is, and I think familiarity breeds contempt only so far. Come back to the point around an emotional connection. If you understand the risk that you're carrying, and if you can tie it to your Gmail account or the way you look after Snapchat or whatever else it might be, then the familiarity is a good thing. Because we're never going to get ahead, technically, of the advances as a bunch of organizations. Some folks will be really, really good at defending, but the vast majority are going to be a little bit away from that very, very sharp end of the spear. Consequently, they're going to be vulnerable to the attackers. So it's as much about preparing for when it's going to happen rather than if, planning to make it less likely if you can, some of the controls you've mentioned already, but also making it less bad when it does. And you mentioned muscle memory, and rehearsals, and getting your executive and the other teams involved within an organization so that rather than familiarity breeds contempt, it is muscle memory, so they can focus on
And they respond faster.
Indeed, they focus on the problem rather than the process, and that's really, really important.
I suppose, Paul, one of the things, going back to Ronan Murphy pucking me outside here and knocking me over, the last thing a guard is going to do when they turn up is say, did you do, like, it was your fault. You made a comment about his hair. Like, there's no victim blaming here, is there? And we have to kind of get around the idea that if this happens, it's because somebody deliberately went out of their way to rob data. I mean, is there truth in that from your perspective?
Absolutely. Like, we're not in the business of pointing fingers at individuals and saying, it's your fault, you did wrong, or you brought this upon yourself. That's not our business at the end of the day. Our business is to facilitate, first of all, finding out who's responsible for this, secondly, bringing them to court, and then working with the organisation to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But part and parcel of that, and I'll go back to what Enda said earlier on, is to ensure that not only the protocols in place within a company, but that they're followed, and secondly, that the staff are aware of what those protocols are and follow them and are familiar with them and receive the training that's necessary. Because if that's not there, most of the cybersecurity assessments that take place will tell you that after your ransomware, your DDoS attacks, your CEO frauds, etc., your next biggest threat to your organizational data is your people. If they're not aware of, if this happens, I do, if that happens, I do, I shouldn't do this because this is the consequence of it, then you're fighting a losing battle.
We found out earlier, Mike, it's 19 minutes. 19 minutes we have
Absolutely.
before they're in, take what they want, and are gone.
Indeed, and coming to Paul's point just a moment ago, the security culture within an organization is really, really important. But the security culture is what your people do when security aren't watching them. And that's the truth of it. And whether that's for 19 minutes or 19 days, right? If they're being watched, they're going to behave differently. And they're going to be aware and they're going to follow the policy. Culture is really about what happens after that. And I think you're absolutely right. The technical side is really important, but the people are critical. They're your front line. Everybody works in security.
But they're traditionally the weakest link. And
For sure.
Even going forward, when AI could be taking up some of the heavy lifting, the human is still going to be the weakest link. The person who is having a bad Monday and maybe they're distracted because something happened at home or they need to be there by that meeting is after overrunning and they will click on something accidentally. We all sent someone the wrong, I sent someone the wrong email earlier today, right? Thankfully there was no bad language.
All of that is absolutely fine, so long as the culture is such, if they do click on a link badly, they don't get blamed for it, so they report it quickly so you can respond. If they go, oh crap, I shouldn't have done that, and hide it, that's where your 19-minute clock starts.
Look, Enda, your organisation is a big one, sensitive data. How do you go about getting the culture right so that everybody in that structure knows if something goes wrong, there's not going to be a ton of bricks land on your head. We look at it, we'll try and make sure it doesn't happen again, but tell us when you find something.
An interesting challenge. We're a very highly regulated environment in insurance. Simple enough business on the outside. We take money in, we hold on to it, and we give it back out to those people who need it. But the middle part is very complex, highly governed by regulation, a lot of policies and procedures. And for a long time, financial services, not just insurance, there's a perception is it's better to do nothing than be caught doing the wrong thing. So again, it's these design thinking simulations where we have some fun and we pretend how we actually really make a mess of this and how we mess stuff up. And you break down that barrier by doing it. Also, we have team leads across all of it. So for every 10 people, we have a go-to person in terms of data protection officer. So people can go very quickly and ask for help and ask for assistance. And some of the times when that starts, and we're a couple of years at this now, you have a lot of juvenile inquiries, but then it actually just gets a little bit tighter. But then people get a bit smart. So the biggest thing we have is not so much loss of physical data, it's loss of printed data. Because we have so many, like we print tens of millions of pages every year to go out to customers. So people get used to tightening up. It's common sense. And it's also pointing out to a colleague if they feel a bit forgetful or a bit distracted about just tightening things up. And also for us, we've done things like we just lock down any access to data. We lock down USB, we lock down email. So you can bring your own devices to work to play with for yourself. All work devices are completely locked down. You cannot move stuff off them. So staff really found that quite difficult at the start. It was quite annoying for me as a senior person trying to use technology. But actually you get used to it. And governance does the heavy lifting and protects you. But the whole thing about it is a process that says something's happened or we think it's happened. And again, in our area, we have regulation around complaints, around customer queries, around issues. Staff are used to reporting them and logging them, and they know they get hassled actually if they don't do it. So, and again, it's just reinforcing that.
Well, it's culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's go to some of the questions on Slido, because I think one of the questions, it relates very much to this. And it's from Chris. Chris Graney. Good evening, Chris. Are the basics being forgotten? This year, simple website vulnerabilities led to some of the biggest breaches. BA, Marriott, Capital One, not complex tech attacks.
Yep.
They were effectively look after the knitting, Mike. They didn't look after the knitting, and as a result, they were exposed.
Yeah. Perfectly honestly, are the basics being forgotten? Yes. As things get more and more complex, keeping everything in order, keeping everything in line gets harder and harder and harder. There's a newsflash. Silver bullets still don't work. Doing the basics well is a foundation to 80% of everything else you need to worry about in cybersecurity. And if you can do that and do it well and automate it, that gives you the bandwidth you need for the really hard 20%. And yeah, taking their BA, Marriott, Capital One, they're all big names. They've all come under a degree of scrutiny with some very, very large potential fines that will be levied against them. And when people say we can't afford to do cyber right, look at the cost of doing it wrong.
Is that the opportunity as well, Mark, when we have people joining in now, that the basics are ingrained? It's like everything else. When a pilot learns to fly, he learns to fly without instruments. He knows that he can just get the plane up and get the plane down using the very basics. Cybersecurity is analogous to that.
I think so, yeah. I think that if you teach the basics, then you start the journey, and the journey goes all the way through to the deployment on a multiple network system, but you have to really embrace the basics and have that culture and those procedures in place within the organization that supports that. So, and from a skills perspective, it starts from a very basic concept of understanding malware to all the way up to really understanding how to really detect sophisticated breaches of security, and that's what we're geared towards is looking across at the horizon from the early stage entry level people up to the most sophisticated CTOs, and figuring out how to really develop the skills that are required.
Rory has a question for Paul. Cybercrime has been rapidly increasing in Ireland over the past number of years. Has the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau grown in relation to this? Not as much, I'm sure, as you would like, but is it one of these things that we are slowly coming around to the idea that this is a huge criminal endeavour that needs a significant state response?
Yeah, we do need a significant response because it is growing. We'd be foolish to sit here and say it's not growing. There have been a number of documents released recently, Policing for the Future of Ireland by the Policing Authority. Our current commissioner that said there recently that we're restructuring, we're going down the lines of increasing, and part of that restructuring is to introduce regional or area cybercrime units or cybercrime bureaus. It will be a significant investment. Will it be enough? Time will tell. Is it necessary? Absolutely. Of course it's necessary. If you have an area of criminality that's growing at a rapid rate, you have to increase the structure that deals with that as well. But not only specifically to deal with that, there has to be an awareness, an institutional awareness within the organisation that if you walk into the likes of Blackrock Station or the Bridewell or somebody, they know what cybercrime is, first of all.
Yeah, they don't dismiss it as something I can't deal with.
Yeah, because there's no point saying, well, if you hold on a second, there's the number of the Cybercrime Bureau. We'll be inundated and the service will just not be delivered. It has to be delivered at the ground. So that training has to take place not only with putting in place specific structures, but general structures that can address it
I'm
too.
guessing it's the same when we were talking to Mark. Eventually, this is going to have to come in Templemore so that the guards coming out of Templemore will have a very basic awareness that cybercrime is a thing and how to deal with it, rather than reaching for the manual when they get a phone call into
And
the
that is
station.
taking place at the moment.
Is it? Good,
Yeah.
okay. Last question. Does more diversity and inclusion help to bridge the skills gap? He asked a panel of 4 men. Mark, to you, I suppose, is it fair to say that what's coming through now is a better gender balance than what it used to be before?
It really is, and I mentioned the data sciences program that launched last week. We had 43% of the intake female, which was quite astonishing, really. That's at PhD level, so it's really encouraging. As we look lower down, it's more of a challenge for us, but we really try and promote and recruit that gender mix when we're enrolling for these programs.
Okay. One last thing, very briefly, if I can ask each of you. What's the most important thing that people need to do here today to make sure they're ready for when it comes? Not if it comes, when it comes, when they have to deal with something. Paul?
Be aware of what it is in the first place. And if it does happen, how to deal with it, how to report it, and who within your organisation is the best person to talk to. But don't be afraid to talk to them in the first place.
Mark?
I would say understand who's connecting to your network.
Okay. Enda?
In the event of something like that, if something happening, is who's in charge, whose responsibility is it to make it happen? Stay calm, stick to the facts.
Stay calm. Stay calm, for the love of God.
Calm, boss,
Mike?
yeah.
I'd say have a plan, practice it, recognise that a plan never survives first contact with the enemy, so stay flexible.
All right, on that point, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Trevett, Enda Kyne, Mark Jordan and Paul Johnstone. Thank you very much, gentlemen.